Thanks for joining us today for our Fireside chat. We have the lovely Josh Goodin here, Vice President of Product Strategy. Josh, I know you're the Vice President of Product Strategy. I basically consider you kind of our wizard of anything marketing technology. Every time I've talked to you, I've got nothing but great nuggets coming out of it. I'm kind of hoping that's what everyone else will gain here too, from talking about what's coming with losing cookies.
Yeah, thank you for having me, DeJuan. I hope the same. I don't know about the wizard, but I'll do my best to convey as much information as I can. It's a complicated topic, so it's worth talking about.
Awesome. So again, this is literally just going to be a conversation. I want to have everyone that's able to view today to say, like, cool, we want to answer a couple of things. What is a cookie? Why do I care? What to expect when these things change? And then any other nuggets that you can sprinkle in. But I guess let's start off of exactly like, what is a cookie?
Yeah, so a cookie is just a fancy way of saying essentially a tracker that tracks what you do across the internet. There's the first party type that lives within an ecosystem like an Amazon, and then there's the third party type that tracks you kind of more broadly across everything that you're doing on the internet. There's IDFAs, there's a couple of different names for what amounts to a cookie, but they're all effectively just trackers.
Okay, how long have these been around? Like since the internet, or?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, if you were to go back to the mid 90s, you'd find that we weren't really using cookies much, but rather we were just relying on like for targeting contextual and just essentially whatever page somebody was on. But we've, as an industry, just an advertising website industry, have relied on cookies for the better part of 20 years now.
Oh, wow. Okay. It's funny. I always just thought they were always there and we've always used them.
Yeah, not originally, no.
So now that we know what a cookie is, like, why should I care of like what's changing, or why do I care about a cookie in general?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as far as first party cookies go, you should still care, but we're going to mostly talk about third party cookies today. First party cookies, you care because being able to use that data allows you to continue to reach customers who you already know. So that's really critically important post the end of third party cookies. And so the reason that you should care mostly at the moment is because Google has said pretty clearly they're going to end the use of third party cookies. And that usage, and the reason it's so tied to Google is because it's the Chrome browser. That usage will end because the browser itself, Chrome, will start deleting cookies. So that connectivity that now lives there between what you do on one site and then as you transition to another, being able to track that sort of path that you've gone through, that's what we're going to lose. And it's got impacts from everything to advertising to websites themselves and how some of the third-party add-ins and applications work on websites, to our ability to count media and how it runs and the effectiveness of media. It's a pretty broad swath of the whole industry that's going to see pretty drastic impacts.
Yeah, that sounds intense. So What are we looking at from like a timing perspective?
That's a great question. That seems to be somewhat of a moving target. So originally we were looking at 2022. Google had vaguely said that sometime in 2022 they were going to do away with cookies. And then they decided to kick the can down the road a little bit and move that out to 2023, realistically like H4 or rather H2 Q4 time in 2023. And then most recently, about 2 weeks ago, Google was like, just kidding, maybe the second half of 24. So Google keeps moving the target a little bit on us. So it's somewhat vague. Piece that I would add here, I think that's maybe important, is just thinking about there are other parties involved who may want to push the end of third-party cookies sooner.
Okay. So, oh man, that's great. So 2 questions, I guess.
Okay.
One, like being that Google's kind of pushed this back, seems like already, like twice already. Is it a big deal that they pushed it back again? Like, was that like surprising, or did you kind of see that coming?
Yeah, it wasn't surprising. Not to me, and not to a lot of people. Honestly, Google, they have been in a position where they've said since they announced that they were going to do away with cookies, that they were going to impose those restrictions on themselves as well. And there's a large swath of Google's revenue as an organization is tied to advertising. And whenever they lose the ability to track, they lose the ability to target, they lose the ability to monetize all that inventory, right? And so because of that, they've been trying to work within the constraints of privacy to come up with a way to replace third-party cookies in a privacy compliant way, because everything they've come up with thus far has really not come through. It's not really been the solution. They've come up with things called Fledge and Flock and Topics, and they keep killing those plans because they don't really meet the requirements of the ability to target consumers in the way advertisers want and still be able to meet the privacy compliancy that's required.
Okay. So let's say I'm a home dealer. Down the street, I got 4 trucks, a ton of trucks on my lot. What does this mean for me once this happens? And like, what do I have to look forward to? Like, is anything going to break?
Yeah. So I would encourage anybody in any industry, automotive dealers, bakery owners, just literally everybody, to engage with whomever you're using for both your website and the way that website is structured, and to engage with your advertising partners, whomever you're doing advertising with, especially if you're utilizing a third party like an agency. If you're not doing it yourself through your Facebook Business Manager or your Google Ads account, if you're doing it through a third party, you're going to want to push those guys, because the impact to you personally as an individual sort of store or even a large business is going to be that your ability to reach consumers at the current cost is going to go away. Your costs are going to increase, or you're going to have to spend more to reach the same number of people. That's an impact to every business, right? Because we've lost sort of the visibility of the effectiveness of our advertising and lost the ability to see what people are doing. We don't know who's interested in buying what we're selling.
No business owner wants to hear that. Prices are going up.
No, nobody does.
Man,
just trying to be forthright and paint a realistic picture for everyone here.
So it's no matter what, larger company to mom and pop shop, it's going to affect across the board.
Absolutely. I'll give you an example of that. We were discussing this with a very large organization that's got locations in probably every state in the country, tens of millions of dollars of ad spend a year, billions of dollars of revenue, and their anticipation was they were going to see their costs double between Cookieville that we live in today and the post-cookie world whenever it's gone. So that's pretty drastic.
Okay. You mentioned something earlier that stuck with me about privacy. And that's kind of why this is all starting to take place. I know there's been different events that have taken place over the last 4 years, we'll say. They're pretty big. Is this are we seeing this change because like government getting involved?
Yeah.
Or am I just kind of going on a guess there?
No, it's not that you're going on a guess there. I would say that there's been just a general public sentiment centered around privacy, and there have been governments getting involved. Think of GDPR, CCPA. Those are definitely governments, one international, one state level government that's definitely been getting involved. Nevada, Delaware, there are several states that have sort of put laws on the books around privacy. And so because people care about it, really the fundamental sort of driver behind a lot of this has been Apple. And a lot of people don't realize that. You think Google, and we're talking about Google, but how is Apple affecting Google? Well, what Apple realized, because they do a lot of research, is that they didn't have any reliance really on cookies, because they don't have reliance on ad revenue, but Google does. And so Apple took it as an opportunity to lean into the privacy concerns the public were showing, and that state governments were showing, and that international governments were showing, and lean into that privacy as an opportunity to sell more devices. Apple can tell potential buyers of a cell phone, hey, we care more about your privacy than anybody else does. So we're going to protect that privacy. And because they being Google in this instance, have ad revenue and revenue tied to devices, now it's just eating away and eroding at their revenue in the device category. So Google feels both the legislative pressure and the pressure of just pure business competition to move towards the end of third-party cookies. If I may add something to your question, though, regarding the government, I mentioned this earlier about third parties getting involved in the privacy concern piece. Google can kick the can as long as they want to down the road as they try to figure out what might be a good replacement for targeting. But they're only going to be able to kick that can so far. And we've seen in the past month the federal government actually bring a monopoly case against Google around particularly search in this instance. But what it shows is that there's a willingness in the federal government, and especially the state governments, to say, hey, this cookie thing, it's got to end. And so given that Google has pushed it out to 2024, I don't think they're going to be able to push it again without some version of government getting involved and saying, you know what, we're going to mandate that cookies have to go away.
Okay, that makes sense. So we know what Apple and Google are doing. What about Bing? And I asked you that because I know you're a Bing guy, so I know you got some insight there.
Yeah, I used to be Microsofty. Bing is following suit. They have a presence in the online search space. They have a presence within the digital advertising space. But honestly, Microsoft advertising, especially on the display front, the non-Bing front, pushed all of that ad selling and that inventory over to AOL, who was then acquired by Oath, who was then acquired by Verizon, who's now renamed themselves as Yahoo Media again. So it's sort of a complicated question in that Bing, from a search perspective, is unaffected, right? But Bing, from the perspective of Microsoft more broadly, its display inventory is affected. But there's a lot to be said around Yahoo and the way they're structuring data post-cookie. That's a really interesting place to actually serve media. And then there's Microsoft Edge, which is already implemented. Microsoft's a big behemoth. It's got a lot of different sort of tendrils in different places. Edge has already implemented many of the same privacy constraints that Safari has. So again, Safari being, Apple's browser, and the cookie being deleted at the browser level, which is what I said earlier. So Edge, Safari, Firefox, all of them have already implemented pretty significant constraints around privacy and cookie continuation. Problem is, Google Chrome represents 65 to 75% of all web traffic. So even though all three of those are sort of in the same boat of implementing this privacy stuff, until Google does something, things don't change all that much because they represent the elephant in the room.
Okay, that makes sense. So they're the main. Once they start going in that direction, then everything will take place.
That'll be the big one, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you for that. Any changes to my strategy? Essentially, it's what I'm trying to figure out here. I want to know what's the difference of like what I'm doing now / what I should be doing later. Should I start implementing some of those changes now, or just kind of wait till the ball drops and then that's when I start?
Yeah, so until the cookie ends, keep doing what you're doing, right? If you've got good ROI on your advertising, I absolutely encourage you to continue to use what you're using, because until the cookie is gone, it's hands down the most effective way to reach consumers, like without a doubt. Once it ends, search is going to be something that's mostly sheltered from the end of third-party cookies. What's not sheltered about it, however, is that it's going to, whenever cookies end and people see their costs going up in social, in the Pinterest, in the Meta, and they see their costs going up for any display advertising that they're doing, people are going to flock back to search because their prices and their costs are going to maintain consistency even post-cookie for a little bit. Once everybody realizes that search is still sheltered from cookies, we can anticipate that people are going to rush back to search. And so the cost per click is likely going to drastically increase in search. Even though it's not directly affected by cookies, it's a sort of secondary effect that's very likely to happen. There are channels that are unaffected by the end of cookies, like OTT advertising, digital television. You guys have heard me talk about that, I'm sure. But there will be vendors out there who can continue to help you reach customers based on their intent signals. You're just going to have to really push advertising vendors to find them. As far as making any drastic changes today, there are certainly changes that you could make if SEO is something that needs to be beefed up. You need to make sure that's taken care of. Your Google business profile, your Bing profile. Those are some steps that you can take today, and that'll benefit your business right away. Right? If you've not focused on your SEO and sort of the profile pages, those are things that are going to help your business today. But as far as changing your advertising, no. But what you can do is really take the time to understand how it's performing today. Use today as a benchmark, right? You can start to understand what your costs are, what's your visit rate, what's your organic visit rate. And once you start to understand those things, once the cookie ends, you can really better see what the impact of your advertising costs are going to be. Maybe it goes up 2x, maybe it goes up 10x, maybe it only goes up 20 or 25% because you've worked hard now to find vendors who are putting together a really good and robust plan to help you continue to reach your consumers post-cookie. So that, I guess, maybe does sort of fit into the bucket. Work with advertising vendors today, push them on answering the question on how they're going to help you post-cookie, and really be aggressive around making sure those vendors are going to be able to use your website data. They're going to be able to target consumers post-cookie. So those are just a few things you could do today versus, a drastic change to your advertising.
Okay. This kind of also sparked something too when you were talking about no one knows what the price is, what's going to go up, whether it's 2 times or 3 times. So being that we know that, well, we don't know that there's not going to be a sweet spot number. So be wary of any vendors or anyone saying like, oh yeah, your advertising is going to go up 50% or 30%. Like we know this because we don't. So we're probably going to be looking at it a good, if I'm going to guess 3 to 6 months of data for once that cookie changes before we can start making those industry recommendations. Is that correct?
Yeah, particularly right after it happens, it's likely going to be a little bit wild as budgets shift, as inventory availability drastically changes, as people pull money out of one and push money into other things. So yeah, you're going to want to take a break for a second and let it just settle over the next 90 to 180 days, to your point, after the cookie ends, to really just understand what's changed and how.
Okay. Speaking of inventory, let's talk auto. So
Okay.
auto impact. I'm curious to see exactly what, because I know we're not going to be able to see exactly what takes place until it happens. But I've, like I said at the very start of this, I come to you as my wizard, and typically you say things and then they come to fruition. If you have to pull out your crystal ball, what do you got for me, Josh?
Yeah. Sadly, automotive is going to be one of the industries most impacted. And that's a couple of good reasons for that. One, if you think about it from the perspective of the way consumers shop, it's a really long considered purchase cycle. That purchase cycle could be a week or two. That's not the norm. It's normally 90 days to 180 days. To back when I was at Microsoft, we had data suggesting that a really common period of time was 9 months of consideration before somebody purchased a vehicle. And so people do a lot of activities in that period of time that if you can't see them, it's very hard to understand that they're in the market to buy a car. There's also, from an automotive perspective, a difficulty that we will have as both vendors and dealers and OEMs around convincing people to log in. Right? If you're Banana Republic and you also own Gap and you also own Old Navy, it's really easy to convince somebody to log in because, knowing your credit card number, your shoe size or your button down size or your shipping address, those are all really sort of compelling reasons to log into a system. With an automotive, because the purchase is so infrequent, we don't have that. The service bays, on the other hand, give you an opportunity to get people to log in, and that's something that automotive dealers certainly should explore as an avenue to getting sort of a login basis from their consumers. You may have to incentivize people to do that, but it's not all doom and gloom. I think in automotive, there's so much sort of ad revenue there that there's a lot of vendors and a lot of data providers and a lot of really big players bearing down on this question of the end of cookies to really come up with good solutions, particularly for an industry that's got so much sort of national impact behind it. So I think that we're going to actually see some interesting innovations over the coming months and even years that, it's not all dark and gloomy for everybody, but we have to acknowledge that automotive's got some struggles that say retail doesn't.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. And I've been slowly watching the push from, I know you said 9 months, I've seen 6 months, like that time. Like,
Yeah,
that's such a long time.
it is.
I've got it shrinking down for myself. I purchased a vehicle and I got it down to a month. And that was me streamlining, like, and also
Yeah,
being in the industry for a while. Like, I
right.
can't wait to the day where I decide I'm going to go ahead and just purchase it. And it takes me 10 minutes and it's delivered to my door.
Yeah, I mean, we're very nearly there. I bought a vehicle 2 years ago, and I bought it over text. I had to show up and sign the paperwork, but I was in the dealership for about 20 minutes.
Man, I still I still envy that process.
Yeah,
So you gave me your crystal ball on the auto industry. Is
yeah,
there another industry that you wanted to touch on? Or, I mean, there was a lot to impact. So if you don't, I
yeah,
totally understand.
yeah. So, I mean, honestly, from an industry perspective, for anybody listening to this, it's kind of tied to what industry you're in, and there's really a spectrum that goes from anything that's a long considered purchase. I mean, think about real estate, automotive, travel plans, financial services, things that sort of sit in that long considered bucket, where you really need to understand consumer intent and then influence that in that journey. Those are the things that are going to see the hardest sort of transition to a post cookie world. Other industries like retail and CPG and QSR, those are industries that are very transactional in nature. And so most of the targeting that Tide does is just broadly to women ages 25 to 54, as an example. So they don't need to know that somebody's in market to buy a new type of laundry detergent in the next 3 months. That's just, it doesn't work that way. Tide sets their targeting profiles and they know who generally buys their products, and then they're just going to be able to more broadly target at a demographic level, which is where things like universal ID come into play and are incredibly useful. It's just, those sort of broad pieces of data around an individual, you can have, and I say this a lot, just sort of differentiate these two. You can know that Josh Goodin lives in this zip code in this size house, and he has this many kids and this many dogs and these 3 vehicles in his driveway, and it's just massive amount of data. And if all you need to know about me is that I buy new button-down shirts once a quarter, then that's easy. I'm following into several different buckets that sort of classify me as somebody who maybe buys shirts.
Mm-hmm.
If, on the other hand, you need to know that over the last 3 months, I've been looking at vehicles and purchased 2, all of those data points about me that just are broadly me don't tell you that I'm in market to buy a car, because those are intent-based signals. So the dichotomy here is around those industries that are reliant on intent and those industries that are more reliant on just broad demographic data. And so depending on sort of which industry or side of that equation your industry falls into, sort of determines how much impact cookies are going to have for you.
Okay. So basically, almost a wait and see, but be prepared as much as possible with all your information. Have your ducks in a row.
Yeah, and understand your industry and your industry's limitations and push on your vendors that way. So, I mean, if you've got somebody trying to sell you on the value of universal ID, if you're in retail or CPG, it's great. It's really good data. If you're trying to sell somebody in automotive or in real estate or financial services, be doubtful. Push on them. Make them explain to you exactly how it's going to help you find somebody who's intending to purchase, fill in the blank, whatever it is, in the next whatever time period. And you're going to find that those things struggle. So just understand sort of limitations around your industry and push on your vendors from that perspective and not just broadly.
Okay. You touched on red flags, which I love to hear red flags I love to be able to give red flags out as far as like when talking to different businesses and different, whether it's mom and pop, large businesses. I don't like to see anyone get swindled. I don't like to see anyone get hurt in the process of any type of advertising, because one, it hurts everybody.
Right.
It takes one bad apple to kind of ruin it for everyone when I come in or we come in and we're like, oh, this is the greatest thing and it's because of this. And they're like, wow, Jim Bob down the street sold me on this. And you're like, I know I know that was a bad idea. What are some of your red flags? Like, leave me alone, get away, or maybe I should shop around a little bit.
Yeah. So we were actually just hitting on one there. Really, this idea of first-party data, universal ID being the solution. That's highly reliant on what industry you're in. And so anybody that wants to just broadly, especially if you're one of the industries that I just rattled off that are going to have more difficulties with the end of third-party cookies, anybody selling you on first-party data being the answer to all the questions, that's an immediate red flag. It means they don't really understand either your industry or your business, or they're just trying to win your business at any cost.
Mm-hmm.
Another example that I think is really dangerous that a lot of agencies in particular will end up using, and I'm not picking on agencies, I just think it's just the nature of the beast. A lot of agencies have basically built their advertising ecosystem for their clients within the Google CM360, used to be called DV360 ecosystem, right? So you can go out there and you can build campaigns and you can reach consumers. And that's great to a point. And that point that it is problematic is the end of third-party cookies. Because if you think about Google, they're the 800-pound gorilla in the room of data. But what's their opportunity to activate that data that they own, the data they own in the ecosystem that they own? YouTube, discovery ads, Google search. That's about it. So knowing all this information about an individual doesn't give Google a lot of opportunity to activate that data. And so if you've got a partner, an advertising vendor who's been utilizing Google as their way to buy media, they're going to run into some problems because you can target people today on Motor Trend. We were talking about automotive a minute ago. You can target people on Motor Trend post or pre-cookie with all of Google's data. Post-cookie, you can still buy Motor Trend through Google. What you can't do is use any of Google's data on Motor Trend. To be able to do that, you have to buy it through Yahoo, because Yahoo owns Motor Trend amongst like literally hundreds of other sites. But if you wanted to be able to use Yahoo's data about the things they're doing in their ecosystem post-cookie, you have to buy it from Yahoo, not from Google. So anybody that's like, hey, we buy media from Google, Google's the one doing this, we're good, we've got all the answers. I would just encourage you to go and look up their latest version of cookie replacement, which is called Google Topics. Search on YouTube for a Digiday article about Google Topics. I don't want to spoil all of it, but the end of it basically is Google telling the guy better luck next week on actually reaching the consumers that he wants to reach. So Google's not the answer. One more I'll add to the list and try to keep this brief is contextual targeting. We haven't talked a lot about that today. It is certainly a viable targeting methodology today. It certainly will be critically important post-cookie, but it's secondary to cookies. And we've seen vendors push onto retailers, dealers, others, this idea of, hey, we've got contextual, it's going to be the new thing, you should run it today. But to keep in the vein of automotive, here's a contextual opportunity. It's based on the keywords that are in the article itself. Four-wheel drive, Tundra, Toyota, Jeep, Sequoia, 4x4, like great keywords, right? I should definitely target the person reading this article, especially if I'm selling a truck or I'm selling a four-wheel drive SUV. Except the article was about the differences between the 80 series and 100 series Land Cruisers, which the last one of was sold in 2007. Not a great opportunity for targeting new car shoppers. But contextually, it's got all the right keywords. So contextual being the newest and greatest thing, yeah, once cookies end, it's great. Right now, it's secondary to using cookies.
Okay. Yeah, when you were listing off the keywords, it sounded like a gold mine. I was like, oh,
yeah,
sign me up.
Absolutely.
Well, I want to say I appreciate you. I don't want to keep everyone here for too long. The idea is just for this to be a conversation and just kind of get some awareness out there. But also within the conversation, I'd like to get any type of feedback. So anyone that's watching this, feel free to reach out to us. And we can definitely plan to have some sort of response to your questions, whether that's us giving out a one-off or that could be possibly even a blog. But we will be sure to answer your questions. Josh, do you have an email that we want to give out, like an info email off the top of your head?
Yeah, I would suggest that if you want to reach out to me directly, you can certainly do so. I don't mind sharing. It's josh.goodin, Goodin @ensira.com, and you can reach me. There's also info@synchrodigital.com, which is a great resource. That'll get you right to Erin Zabrak, who many of you guys probably know as well, and she's a really good resource for getting questions answered as well. So feel free to reach out to either of us.
Awesome. And you see how great that guy Josh is. I was trying to shield you from all those questions.
I love talking to our customers.
Well, I definitely appreciate everyone. Until next time, you guys have a good day.
Thanks.